Hello, I'm the War Nerd, and this is going to be a vlog today about a collaborative project I did with some of my students that I teach on a BTEC course for IT. So I'm just going to talk a bit about how I took some assets that they created and some ideas that they had for a game and helped them with implementing their ideas basically, but also just talk a bit about the assets they create. So the basic idea was that they would create some assets like sound, 3D, 2D, whatever, and then they would put all those together to make a game in Unity. Now originally, for what was basically part of their work experience, with my company Alien Rabbit, was offering students different briefs for work that they could do, which could count towards their work experience hours, which is something that they have to do as part of their course. But this group wanted to do their own game concept. Now, previously this group have done quite a few developing janky games. So one of the early games they did was called Penal, I think, and it was all based around. There's a twine game that's around. Well, I don't even know want to go into really, but they came up with this name for the game they want to make called Snipper. So it wasn't going to be that serious in tone, but I also did want them to learn a little bit about making the basic mechanics or designing the basic mechanics for an arcade game, so that they could, then make some sort of prototypal arcade type game, learn a bit about game design on the way, and creating game assets and art, and putting those all together in Unity. So there's a group of them that have made various original pieces or assets like music. They've documented their work, also created some materials in Unity. They did create the basic system for the levels, like the actual mazes. I then added to all this, which was always going to be part of the deal anyway, because they were doing it for 2 weeks basically, 35 hours of time as a work experience, and then as me as the quote-unquote employer in this case, was then also collating it all together as a game developer and designer. So they just finished doing all that last week, and this is basically a documentation of how that went. So I'll show the actual gameplay now. So it has worked out actually as quite a little fun, albeit short, maze-based physics game. There is an original 3D model designed by one of the students, which he called Friend. Now all the story of the background is sort of just made up on the spot, and like I said, where possible I've used all the materials that they've provided with some modifications, which I'll talk about further, because there'll be a time-lapse video of the entire development actually, which is something I like to do just because I think it's interesting. So if you want deeper reflection of how this went, then you can just watch that, and I'll go, it's probably 10 minutes or so time lapse of me just going over every single aspect. But generally it was quite a fun experience actually, just putting it all together. The music was actually turned out really, really good. I'm not sure what software app that the student used, but it's a classic retro arcade game soundtrack. And then I just collated together all the menus. Obviously did a lot of programming. Did have a crack at programming some of the functionality, but they were struggling because they're only students. They're only really just started looking at Unity, how to use Unity and C# scripting. They've already looked at they've been learning HTML, Python, JavaScript, CSS, etc. But only first year. Well, just finished their first year BTEC level 3 students, so it would be a bit much to expect them to do all that. I did manage to implement player movement. Obviously, you play you're just a ball, a bit like a Pac-Man type figure, with a light attached to it to give it a bit of pizzazz, I suppose. And they are quite obsessed with Dr. House. So he features in several places. He's actually the material for the exit, for the end game of the loop. It's pretty fun in terms of like how physics. I had to do a lot of like playing around with settings to get them right, and they could probably do with some more tweaking. As could the level design, to be honest. I mean, it's basically like, so I took their idea that they had initially made anyway in Unity of like a basic maze scene. It's got a camera that follows the player along as well, so you get a sense of movement as well. It's not like a fixed static camera, which is good. And then you basically have to try and navigate down 3 levels of this maze, and then there's like physics challenges along the way, different objects, and the friends themselves, which obviously on contact with you take away your health, and if they do it enough, then you die, and then you get like an end game screen. All of which you've been playing on now. So yeah, it was a lot of fun doing this. I'll just now go into the time lapse where I'll talk a little bit further. Hopefully for my students it gives them a little bit of an idea of like how to go around creating an arcade game prototype, because I think here I'm documenting how I'm building on one idea, taking it a bit further, you know, with the 3 different mazes, with the sort of slide I've tried to create, even though it's a bit janky. The prototype at present is still a bit janky. It would need a lot of fixing and refining to make it into a really like proper game, when you obviously have multiple levels, maybe challenges, a bit more of a story. But I think as a prototype it sort of functions, and it's quite fun for a quick blast. So yeah, I was proud of the students for, especially the music and the 3D. Like the student who did the 3D modelling is not really experienced with Blender, but did actually have a good crack at it, and I ended up with quite a distinctive like model design, which is cool. And the student who also did the initial level design for the first scene, which I built on top of, did a good job as well, just getting used to Unity's basic systems, and I think hopefully learned a lot. Anyway, I won't yabber on too much. The time lapse will follow, and I'll do an audio narration where I talk. Okay, so yeah, basically I'll say from the start of this that I took a sort of I took very much a vibe coding approach to actually doing the programming on this game. So there's extensive use of ChatGPT. I've only been doing the game in my spare time after work, a few hours. It's still taking up though about 6 hours. I mean, the time lapse footage that you'll see here is actually about 6 hours of work. Now of course at first I was just trying to I had to swap the textures out for the floor and the wall. I quickly just generated some textures I could use for that. But I have tried to also use as many of the game assets that were provided by the students also as well, so it's probably about, I'd say, 60-40 balance. So at this stage I came up with the idea of implementing ramps, which I thought would be quite fun. Obviously started trying to get the progress bar in for the health. I had the idea of adding the planet in. Thought that'd be an interesting thing. So that was early on. I also had this idea of having like a force field around the map, although I changed that later but again, yeah, just sort of experimenting with a few like aesthetics, doing a bit of programming there, like trying to improve the actual enemies. At first they move quite statically, as you can probably see here. So there was an interesting dynamism, I think, starting to develop here, but it still needed a lot of balancing, and it was less refined, I guess, than it got later on, even though obviously it still needs a lot of work. But the basic mechanics were in place here for the actual game. Play loop with the enemies following you around. The actual enemy following script's fairly simple. I did eventually add rotation as well, so that and a bit of randomness in that rotation, so it wasn't too static. But basically they just make a sound when they're near you, and within a certain distance they'll make a sound. And also obviously when you make contact with the friend, you'll get hurt, which I got working later. So again, just here I started working a bit more on the programming, so there's a bit more of a programming going on here. As I said, vibe coding approach, I hold my hands up. I'm a bit new to C# as well, so my background's actually more as a JavaScript developer, but I'm much more familiar with the Unity API now than I was, say, a few years ago. I've been working with Unity. I did a game called Station Beyond, so I'm a bit more familiar with its intricacies now. But this is mostly doing the player controller, which is fairly vital to the entire gameplay loop. Admittedly, I was relying on ChatGPT for some help there, as you could probably see, just to speed the entire process up, because as I said, I've been doing this a few hours after work when I can manage it. So yeah, like I said, 6 hours of additional work on top of work in a week is quite a lot. Doing the scroll bar, and then also making it so that actual events when the player collides with a tagged enemy actually has an effect on the scroll bar. Fairly easy to implement. Again, just found some ChatGPT generated code, because it's a fairly typical thing that basically just you have a variable that you can access in various scripts, which then allows for that. The actual physics colliders were a bit off, so I spent a bit of time messing around with that on the enemies as well. That I had to fix bits of that. I did use Samuel L. Jackson's laugh, modified it a bit for the enemy sounds. I thought I wanted some sort of sound when you actually are hit by the enemy. I'm starting on the UI stuff now. Extremely boring, but we need end screens, we need all that sort of thing. So I started prototyping the UI with the canvas component applied to the main camera. Found a font. This is all stuff from today, actually. I wanted to make it have a bit more character, so instead of just using a generic font, again, it needs a lot of refining in terms of how responsive as well the actual text are. You'll probably notice from the prototype footage before that it was just a bit off. Yeah, get some house sound effects. This is actually fairly close to the end of the game. UI stuff, quite boring. There's a bit of joy in there though, because you can sort of render these weird little scenes, which is fun. I'm just trying to think what would the students actually want me to put in there, because they've got quite a wacky sense of humour, so I was just trying to take that on board and obviously use the assets they provided with Dr. House and everything, and make it be a bit zany, I suppose. I did do also a bit of sound editing, so one of the students had created a really, really cool arcade type soundtrack, but I wanted to slow it down a bit so that when you're on the menus, actually you can tell there's a difference between the being on those menus and then actually being on there within the game, if you want. Just create some text here for a little bit of background for what you actually have to do, obviously providing players some context for the controls too, which are pretty simple. It's literally just WSAD or keyboard, move around, that's about it. Mouse clicks for buttons. Yeah, a lot of just basically did the friends on the menu, which have slightly different behaviour to the standard pathfinding of the enemies, so that's just that there. But again, just modifying what I already had and then modifying it a little bit so that they had slightly different behaviours in the component, which was quite fun. I thought it was a nice little touch as well. So basically, when you're on the menu screen, these little enemies will walk around. Oh yeah, so just debugging some random stuff here. Had some physics issues. Still might be a little few bugs of that. I've not had time to really debug it really that deeply. But yeah, as I said, this is very much like a vibe coding project, to be honest. But it's been fun. I think the end results were more or less cohesive, though it needs fixing and a lot of other stuff. It's a good start though. Hope the students like it and find it interesting. I'm planning on adding a timer function as well, so you actually get a scoring system of some sort, which would give it an extra layer of challenge, and then you can export out a screen grab of how well you did or what have you, or your high score. Makes it a bit competitive then. Adding the credits for all the students that did all the asset stuff and provided the starting point for the prototype. As I said before, never expecting them to do all the development. That would be ridiculous expectation, just a bit unfair, unless they're really, really keen. Provide a bit of context there with the screen, put in some of the screen grabs that they provided, the music that one of the students have made for the music, which I think overall is actually one of the most successful aspects of the actual asset design. I was really, really happy with that, how that turned out, and the map as well, the 3D model. And yeah, that's about it really. I don't know if I can really say much more about that in terms of narration. Hope you found this interesting. This is just basically just the end bits now. I'm just fixing up little bits and bobs. Usual things with just scripts not working for some reason. Oh yeah, I forgot to put the event system in for the controls, so it wasn't registering it, and I was just a bit stumped by that for a few minutes, as that's going to happen, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, a little bit of last minute refining, though it still needs more in terms of the actual map designs. And then adding rotations, that was basically the final thing I did for the enemies, so that they got a little bit of randomness in the rotations, so it's not all the same. So you can see here just how much you have to go back and forth doing the same thing again and again. Game development really is a lot of doing that, actually. You'll learn this once you get into it. So it's a very back and forth process. Sometimes it's like extremely interesting and really you get into the flow state, but then other times you get stuck on something and it's an annoying thing, but you have to fix it. So breaks are often required, which is what I'm going to have right after this. But yeah, that's basically it. And then I'm just doing the builds here, and that was pretty much the end of it, apart from fixing some of the UI stuff, because I hadn't really done it properly when I first sketched it out, just because I was doing it really fast. So this is to make it so that it's fixed to certain positions, which at first I just sort of just sketched it out. I really should have done that from the start. I just, as an oversight on my part, really, to be honest. It's still not perfect. It does need more refactoring in that regard, but again, just working towards the bare minimum prototype, or minimal viable build, as they call it in the industry, I guess. And yeah, that's it pretty much. Lots of playtesting again. Oh yeah, I've actually done it. Boo, 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 that sort of thing.